When my husband passed, I thought the hardest part would be learning to live without him. I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering that the people I called family, the ones who sat at my dinner table, were plotting to declare me incompetent. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed by your own blood, subscribe now, because this story proves it's never too late to stand up and reclaim your dignity. I never thought a Thursday morning in Savannah could change everything. At 66, I believed I had lived long enough to recognize every kind of heartbreak. Losing Robert 3 months ago had nearly broken me, but I was learning to breathe again quietly, methodically, just the way he would have wanted. The call came precisely at 8:45 a.m. "Mrs. Alden, this is Holloway and Pierce Law. We're ready to finalize the estate review this afternoon at 1. Will you be attending?" The woman's voice was polite but detached, as if she were confirming a lunch reservation rather than the dividing of a man's life. I said yes. After months of probate delays, I wanted this over with. Maybe then I could start healing, or at least pretending to. I put on my charcoal gray suit, the one Robert insisted made me look like I owned the whole city. He'd given it to me the year we renewed our vows, along with the silver locket that still rested against my collarbone. Inside was a photo of us at Tybee Beach, windblown, laughing, sunburned. When I caught my reflection in the hall mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Grief had softened my jawline, hollowed my cheeks. My hair, once chestnut, had turned almost entirely white. The drive to Whitaker Street was slow. The autumn humidity clung to the air, and the traffic along Forsyth Park moved like syrup. I shouldn't have been nervous. Robert's will was clear. Everything, the house, the savings, even the art studio he'd built behind the garden, was meant to stay with me until I was gone. Only then would it pass to Daniel, our son. Still, a strange unease sat in my chest as I parked in the underground garage below the law office. The place smelled faintly of oil and damp cement. I gathered my handbag and the folder of documents the attorney had requested. I had just locked the car when I heard it, a voice echoing softly from behind a concrete column. "Ma'am, please wait." A man stepped into view. He looked to be in his early 50s, dressed in a weathered flannel shirt and worn boots. His hands were calloused. His face carried the weary stamp of someone who had slept outdoors too often. My instinct was to turn away. Robert had always warned me never to stop for strangers in garages. But then I saw his eyes, not wild or threatening, but urgent, human, desperate. "Please, ma'am, I need to tell you something important," the man said, staying a respectful distance away. "You're Mrs. Alden, right? Robert's widow?" My heart began pounding. How did this stranger know my name? Know about Robert? "I don't know who you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while reaching for my phone. "But I need you to leave me alone. Please," he said again. "I know how this looks, but I used to work for Holloway and Pierce upstairs. I was let go 3 weeks ago, but before they fired me, I overheard things. Things about your husband's will." I froze. Holloway and Pierce was Robert's law firm, the same firm I was about to meet with. The man glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. "Your daughter-in-law, Mallory, she's been in contact with certain people at the firm. There are documents, things she's had prepared." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "Ma'am, I can't prove it yet," he said quietly. "But I think she's been planning to alter your husband's will. She's been telling people you're not mentally competent to handle the estate. She has medical records, statements from people claiming you've been acting confused and forgetful." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the side of my car for support. "That's impossible. I've never been diagnosed with anything. I'm perfectly fine." "I know," he said. "That's why I've been waiting here, hoping to catch you before the meeting. She wasn't expecting you to show up today. She told Mr. Holloway you probably wouldn't even remember the appointment." My anger flared, overriding my fear. How dare she? How dare anyone question my mental state? The man nodded sympathetically. "There's more, ma'am. She's been forging documents, making it look like your husband wanted to change his will in his final weeks. She even has fake medical reports saying he was concerned about your ability to manage finances." I felt like I was drowning. None of this made sense. Robert had never expressed any concerns about me managing money. If anything, I was the one who handled most of our finances throughout our marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. "Because I liked your husband, ma'am. He was always kind to me when he came to the office, and because what they're doing isn't right. I may not have much, but I still have my conscience. I looked at this stranger, this man risking what little he had left to warn me. What's your name? Eddie Caldwell. I was a paralegal at Holloway and Pierce for 12 years before they decided I knew too much about their side business. Side business? Eddie glanced around again. They've been helping certain clients manipulate wills and estates, Eddie said in a low voice. Taking large fees to make inconvenient family members disappear from inheritance documents. Your daughter-in-law has been paying them very well. The elevator dinged in the distance. Eddie stepped back, glancing toward the sound. Ma'am, you need to be very careful in there. They're expecting you to just sign papers without reading them carefully. Don't let them pressure you into anything. Before I could ask another question, he slipped away, vanishing into the shadows between parked cars. For several long seconds, I stood frozen, my pulse drumming in my ears. Part of me wanted to dismiss his warning as the ramblings of a desperate man, but something deep in my gut told me he was telling the truth. I thought of Mallory, my daughter-in-law of 8 years. She'd always been charming, attentive even, but lately there had been small cracks in the facade, the hushed conversations with Daniel that stopped when I entered the room, the forced smiles at Sunday dinners, the quiet resentment when I mentioned Robert's name. With trembling fingers, I pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Eddie behind a concrete pillar, his expression etched with worry. The ride to the 15th floor felt endless. When the doors slid open, I stepped into the plush reception area of Holloway and Pierce Law. The mahogany furniture gleamed under soft lighting, the faint scent of lemon polish filling the air. What had once felt stately now seemed predatory, a stage dressed to disarm. Mrs. Alden. The receptionist greeted me with a professional smile. They're waiting for you in conference room B. Her voice was warm, but her eyes flickered with something colder recognition, maybe even pity. As I walked down the marble hallway, my heels echoed sharply, the sound swallowed by the thick silence of closed office doors. Behind one, I caught muffled voices low, deliberate. I paused outside conference room B, my hand hovering over the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes at the long table. 3 men in suits, and one smaller figure, shoulders straight, hair pulled neatly back. Mallory. Taking a steadying breath, I opened the door. The air inside was cool and sterile. The men looked up, all polite smiles and shallow courtesy. Mallory turned, her face lighting with surprise too quickly. "Lucinda," she exclaimed, "I didn't think you'd be joining us today." The sweetness in her tone was lacquered over something else, panic. In that instant, I knew Eddie had been right. "Hello, Mallory," I said, keeping my voice even despite the storm building inside me. "Of course I'm here. This meeting concerns my husband's estate." The lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and eyes like cold glass, gestured to an empty chair. "Mrs. Alden, please have a seat. We have several documents requiring your signature today." As I sat down, I noticed Mallory twisting her wedding ring around and around, the metal glinting under the recessed lights. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Her attention stayed fixed on the stack of papers before her, the picture of practiced innocence. "Before we begin," I said, setting my purse firmly on the polished oak table, "I'd like to understand exactly what we're discussing today. My husband and I reviewed his will many times. I'm very familiar with his wishes." The attorney exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with his colleagues. "Mrs. Alden," he began, clearing his throat, "there have been some recent developments. Your husband made certain amendments to his will in his final weeks, expressing concerns about—" "Stop." The word came sharper than I expected. "What kind of concerns?" Mallory finally lifted her eyes to mine. They looked wide, damp, almost sympathetic. "Lucinda, Robert was worried about your health," she said softly. "He mentioned incidents, times when you seemed confused or forgetful. He just wanted to make sure the estate would be handled properly." The words struck like an open-handed slap. "Incidents?" I repeated. "What incidents?" One of the younger attorneys slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Alden, we have documentation of several occasions when family members noted troubling behavior, memory lapses, confusion about dates and names, difficulty managing household finances." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were medical reports, handwritten statements, even printed photographs. My breath caught as I recognized Mallory's handwriting on one of the statements dated barely 6 weeks ago. Lucinda became extremely agitated when asked about balancing her checkbook. She couldn't recall recent purchases and accused Daniel of trying to access her bank account. My hands shook so violently I could hardly hold the paper. "This is completely false," I said through clenched teeth. "I never accused my son of stealing anything." Lucinda?" Mallory said softly, her voice dipped in pity. "You did say those things. We were all so worried about you. That's why Robert decided to make arrangements." I stared at her, the woman I'd welcomed into my family, who had sat at my table and called me Mom for nearly a decade. The gentle smile she gave me now was a mask I no longer recognized. In that instant, I understood what Eddie had meant. "What arrangements?" I managed to ask. The lead attorney cleared his throat. "Your husband amended his will to establish a trust. The estate would be managed by a trustee in this case, your son Daniel, with provisions for your care and living expenses." The room began to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "You're telling me Robert didn't trust me to handle my own finances?" "It wasn't about trust," Mallory said quickly. "It was about protection. Robert loved you so much, Lucinda. He just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "Oh." Her voice dripped with feigned compassion. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, trying to process what I was hearing. When I opened them again, something in the corner of the room caught my attention, a small recording device, its red light blinking steadily. "Are you recording this meeting?" I asked. The attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. "It's standard practice for estate settlements," one of them replied. "Standard practice to record a grieving widow without her consent?" I countered. My voice had turned sharp, steadier than I felt inside. Before anyone could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. A secretary peeked in, looking nervous. "Mr. Holloway, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." The lead attorney frowned. "We're in the middle of a meeting." "Sir, he says his name is Eddie Caldwell, and he has information about this case." All the color drained from Mallory's face. Her fingers went still against the ring she'd been twisting. "I don't know anyone by that name," Holloway said briskly. "Tell him we're busy." "Actually," I said, standing up, "I'd like to hear what Mr. Caldwell has to say." "Lucinda, that's not necessary," Mallory interjected, her voice higher than before. "Let's just focus on signing the documents." But it was already too late. Eddie appeared in the doorway cleaner than he'd been in the parking garage, but still out of place among the polished floors and tailored suits. "Mrs. Alden," he said respectfully, nodding at me. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you need to see." Holloway's expression hardened. "Sir, you're trespassing. I'll have security remove you." "Go ahead," Eddie said calmly. "But first, Mrs. Alden should know that I have copies of the original documents, the real ones, from before they were altered." The room went silent. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Eddie reached into his worn messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder. "I made copies before they fired me," he said. "Your husband's original will, dated 6 months ago, and the real medical reports from his doctor, not the forged ones they created." Mallory suddenly lurched to her feet, swaying as if the ground had tilted beneath her. I don't feel well," she murmured. "Sit down, Mallory," I said, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You're going to want to hear this." "Oh." Eddie opened the worn folder and began laying papers on the table one by one. "Mrs. Alden, your husband never changed his will," he said steadily. "These people," he gestured toward the attorneys, "have been working with your daughter-in-law to fabricate false amendments. They forged your husband's signature and created fake medical records to make it appear he doubted your mental capacity." "That's outrageous," Mr. Holloway snapped, color rising to his face. "This man is clearly unstable. We have witnesses to Mr. Alden's concerns about his wife's condition." "You mean the witnesses your firm paid?" Eddie countered. His tone stayed calm, deliberate. "I have proof of those payments as well." Mallory made a small, broken sound and collapsed back into her chair, face drained of color. For a moment, I thought she'd fainted, but her eyes were still open, darting wildly around the room like a cornered animal. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" Her lips trembled before words stumbled out. Daniel and I, we had debts. His business, the new house, everything's mortgaged. We didn't mean for it to go this far." You needed to steal from me, I said quietly, finishing the sentence she couldn't. Eddie slid a document across the table. This is your husband's original will, Mrs. Alden. Signed, witnessed, notarized, the authentic one. Everything Robert owned passes to you, exactly as intended. My breath caught as I traced the familiar sweep of Robert's signature, the same curve of ink I'd watched him write thousands of times across bills, cards, and letters over 42 years of marriage. For a heartbeat, grief and relief collided inside me. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Mallory was crying now, mascara streaking her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. We just thought the trust would make things easier. Easier for you to control every penny, I said. Mr. Holloway began shuffling papers, his composure cracking. Mrs. Alden, there's clearly been some misunderstanding. Perhaps we should reschedule. No. My voice cut through the air. We're finishing this now. I looked around the room at the woman who had smiled at me while plotting behind my back, at the men who'd sold their integrity for a check. Then I turned to Eddie, the one person with nothing to gain and everything to lose who had still chosen to tell the truth. A man who had risked what little stability he had left just to make sure I knew the truth. What happens now? I asked quietly. Eddie's jaw tightened as he looked toward the attorneys. Now we call the police. He reached for his phone. Mallory let out a strangled sob and slumped forward, fainting for real this time. I felt no sympathy. The woman who had just collapsed wasn't the daughter-in-law I thought I knew. She was a stranger who had worn my family's trust like a mask for 8 years, and that mask had finally cracked. The police arrived within 20 minutes, though those minutes felt like hours. Mallory had regained consciousness and sat slumped in her chair, mascara smeared, her expression hollow. The sweetness she'd always performed was gone. What remained was the coldness of exposure. Detective Sarah Chen was a woman near my own age, mid-60s, her sharp eyes softened only by experience. She listened patiently as Eddie recounted what he'd witnessed, examining each page of evidence with deliberate care. Mrs. Alden, she said at last, I'll need you to tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Start from the beginning. My throat tightened. 8 years ago, when Daniel brought Mallory home to meet us, she seemed perfect. 25, polite, a nurse at Memorial Hospital. Robert and I adored her. She was thoughtful, gracious. Too gracious, I realize now. Detective Chen nodded for me to continue. She always agreed with everything Robert said. Always said exactly what I wanted to hear. I thought she was just trying to fit in, but looking back, I paused, feeling the weight of recognition settle in my chest. About 3 years ago, she began making little comments, subtle things, asking if I remembered conversations that never happened, insisting I'd misplaced things that were never mine to lose. At first, I laughed it off. Then I started doubting myself. Mallory looked up, eyes red. Lucinda, I was genuinely worried about you. No, I said, sharper than before. You were planting seeds. You wanted people to question my memory so you could take everything Robert left me. Detective Chen turned to Eddie. Mr. Caldwell, tell me what you witnessed at the firm. Eddie pulled a small notebook from his jacket, hands remarkably steady. About 6 months ago, Mrs. Mallory Alden started coming to Holloway and Pierce regularly. Mr. Holloway told us she was discussing estate planning for her husband's family, but then the meetings became closed-door and frequent. He flipped through his notes, his voice calm, certain. I started paying attention because something felt off, Eddie said, flipping through his small notebook. Mallory would bring documents she claimed were from doctors, statements from supposed family friends, even photographs meant to show Mrs. Alden in confused states. Detective Chen leaned forward slightly. What kind of photographs? Mallory shifted in her seat, her hands twisting together. Eddie looked at her with open disgust before answering. Photos of Mrs. Alden at the grocery store, at the bank, even at family gatherings, all taken from a distance, with captions full of lies. One showed her at a checkout counter, chatting with a cashier. Mallory's statement claimed she'd been confused about money, unable to finish her purchase. But you can clearly see in the picture she was smiling, waiting while her groceries were being bagged. My hands clenched into fists. The violation was sharp, physical. You were following me? I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. Mallory's reply came in a whisper. I needed documentation. The lawyers said they required evidence. Evidence of what? I snapped. Of me living my normal life? Detective Chen continued taking notes, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Alden, were you aware of any financial issues your son or daughter-in-law might have been facing?" I shook my head. Daniel always seemed fine. He runs a logistics firm. They live comfortably large house in Oldfield Park, new cars, vacations twice a year. Mallory let out a bitter laugh. "All of it's built on debt. The house has 2 mortgages. The business is barely surviving. Those vacations? Maxed out credit cards. We owe over $300,000. The number struck me like a physical blow. 300,000? How is that even possible? Mallory wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. Daniel's contracts fell through 2 years ago. He was too proud to tell you or Robert. We thought we could recover. When Robert got sick, we realized the inheritance might be our only way out. I stared at her, my heart sinking. My son has been drowning for 2 years, and he said nothing? Tears streamed down her face. He didn't want you to see him fail. So instead of asking for help, I said, voice breaking, you decided to steal from me. It wasn't stealing, Mallory cried. The trust would have taken care of you. You'd never have wanted for anything. Eddie snorted softly. A trust that paid her $40,000 a year while the rest of Robert's estate covered your debts? I saw the drafts. You were turning her life into your bailout plan. Mallory lowered her head, silent now, as the weight of her betrayal filled the room. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. It was about my own son and his wife systematically planning to control every aspect of my life. Does Daniel know? I asked Mallory, my voice shaking. Is he part of this? She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. He knows about the debts, she said finally. And he knew we were hoping the inheritance would solve everything. But he doesn't know about the forged documents or the lies about your health. He believes Robert really changed his will because he was worried about you. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. So your husband led your son to believe his father thought his mother was becoming incompetent? Mallory nodded miserably. I've been telling him stories for months. Little incidents I made up, times when you supposedly forgot things or got confused. I needed him to believe it. The room tilted around me. Not only had she lied to my face, she had poisoned my relationship with my own child. What incidents? I demanded. Mallory's eyes dropped to the floor. I told him you left the stove on and nearly caused a fire. That you got lost on your way to the pharmacy. That you accused the gardener of stealing. That you hid cash around the house and couldn't find it later. Each lie landed like a strike to the chest. None of that ever happened, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. I know, she whispered. Detective Chen closed her notebook. Mrs. Alden, I'll need you to come to the station to make a formal statement, and I'll need copies of all these documents. She turned toward the attorneys who had sat frozen in silence. Gentlemen, we'll also be investigating your firm's involvement. Mr. Holloway finally found his voice. Detective, we acted on information provided by our client. If that information was false, we're as much victims as Mrs. Alden. Eddie gave a bitter laugh. Victims? You charged them $50,000 to falsify reports and forge signatures. I've got your invoices. The attorney's face went pale. That's not, we don't. Save it, Detective Chen said coldly. You can explain it downtown. As officers began collecting evidence, I looked across the table at Mallory, the woman who had shared holidays, hugged me at birthdays, and held Robert's hand in the hospital. Was any of it real? I asked softly. The dinners, the laughter, the family you pretended to love, was any of it real? Mallory lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes shimmering. I did love you, she whispered. I just loved money more. At first, yes, Mallory whispered. When I met Daniel, when we got married, I really did care about you and Robert. But when the bills started piling up, when we saw how much the estate was worth, she stopped, but she didn't need to finish. I understood. Somewhere along the way, her love for my son had curdled into something desperate. Debt had eaten through her decency, turning the woman who once cared about our family into someone willing to destroy me to save herself. As Detective Chen began escorting everyone out, a thought struck me cold. If Eddie hadn't warned me, if he hadn't risked what little safety he had left, I would have come to this meeting blind. I would have signed those papers, believing my husband had spent his final weeks doubting me. I would have spent the rest of my life thinking Robert had died disappointed in me, while his money paid for the very lies that had convinced him I couldn't be trusted. The realization made my knees buckle. I sank back into my chair. Then I looked at Eddie. This man, who lived out of a second-hand sedan, had given me back something beyond wealth, the truth about my husband's faith in me, and now I had to decide what to do with it. 3 days later, I sat in my kitchen, the morning light catching the rim of Robert's coffee mug beside mine. My phone lit up again, 17 missed calls from Daniel. I still hadn't answered. I wasn't ready to hear how much of Mallory's poison he had swallowed. Eddie had stopped by twice, dropping off copies of the evidence and refusing to accept the small envelope of money I tried to press into his hand. "You already paid me," he said simply. "You believed me." It humbled me. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man with nothing had shown me more loyalty than the family who'd had everything. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole I saw Daniel standing on my porch, face gaunt, suit rumpled, hair uncombed. Beside him stood Mallory, small, pale, her confidence drained away. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice cracking on the single word. "We need to talk." I studied him carefully, searching for traces of the boy Robert and I had raised. "Do we?" I asked, my tone calm, almost detached. "Please, Mom," he said. "Let us come in. Let us explain." "Oh." After a pause, I moved aside, not out of forgiveness but out of duty. I needed to know the truth of how far my own son had gone. They sat on the couch Robert and I had picked out 15 years ago, the fabric still holding the faint scent of cedar and memory. If you believe every lie deserves its reckoning, hit subscribe and stay with me, because the next part of my story will show what happened when I finally confronted the one person I never thought I'd stand against, my own son. The same couch where we'd first welcomed Mallory into our family when Daniel brought her home. The same couch where birthdays were celebrated, grandbabies dreamed about, and laughter once filled the air. Now, every memory on that fabric felt poisoned by deceit. "Detective Chen told me everything," Daniel said, skipping any greeting. His voice was rough, worn, about the fake documents, the forged medical reports, the lies about Dad changing his will. I remained standing, my arms crossed. And I had no idea, Mom. I swear to you I didn't know any of that. I studied his face, the same face I'd kissed goodnight for decades, the son I'd loved without condition. "But you knew about the debts." His shoulders slumped. "Yes, we're drowning, Mom. The business is failing. We owe money everywhere. I was ashamed to tell you or Dad. I kept thinking I could fix it before it got this bad. So when your father got sick," I said quietly, "you started thinking about the inheritance." Daniel flinched as if struck. "Not like that, not the way you mean." "Then how?" I pressed. Mallory spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Daniel, tell her the truth. All of it." Her voice cracked on every word. The woman sitting on my couch no longer resembled the cold strategist from that conference table. Her confidence had collapsed into guilt. Daniel ran both hands through his hair. "When Dad got his diagnosis, when we knew it was terminal, I panicked. I worried about you being alone in this house, handling everything by yourself." "I'm 66, Daniel," I said evenly. "Not 96. "I know," he said. "But Mallory," she started saying things, little things. She said Dad had mentioned being worried about you, that you were getting forgetful. "What little things?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Like last Christmas you forgot our dinner plans, or when you couldn't remember the neighbor's dog's name, or that time you put the milk in the pantry instead of the fridge." I stared at him. "You canceled dinner because Mallory was sick. The neighbor's dog is named Butterscotch, and I've never forgotten it. And putting milk in the pantry after 3 hours of gardening doesn't make me incompetent." He blinked, confusion spreading across his face. "But Mallory said—" "Mallory lied," I said flatly. "About everything." Mallory's eyes filled again, silent tears sliding down her cheeks as the truth settled between us like a verdict neither of them could escape. "I twisted things," Mallory whispered. "I took ordinary moments and made them sound like signs of dementia. I made him see problems that weren't there." Daniel looked as if someone had kicked the floor out from under him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was desperate," she said, voice cracking. "Because we were losing everything. I thought if you believed your mother needed help managing the estate, you'd be willing to let us handle things for her." Handle things, I repeated slowly. You mean steal from me? No! Mallory's protest was weak, almost childlike. We would have taken care of you. You'd have had everything you needed. Under your control, I said coldly. $40,000 a year while you used Robert's money to pay off your debts. Daniel's head snapped up. What are you talking about? Ask your wife about the trust she had drawn up, I said. Ask her how much of the estate was going to pay your mortgages and credit cards while I lived on an allowance. I watched comprehension spread across his face, the shock, the horror, the slow burn of betrayal. Mallory, he said hoarsely, tell me she's wrong. She couldn't even meet his eyes. The lawyers said it was the best way to protect everyone's interests. Oh, everyone's interests? Daniel exploded, rising to his feet. You were planning to steal my mother's inheritance? We were drowning, Mallory cried, her composure shattering. Your business was collapsing. We owed money everywhere, and you were too proud to ask for help. I was trying to save us. By destroying my mother? Daniel's voice cracked, the pain in it sliced through my anger. For the first time, I saw him not as an accomplice but as another casualty of her manipulation, a man who doubted his own mother because love had been weaponized against him. Daniel, I said softly, sit down. He sank onto the couch, looking like a man who'd just discovered his entire life was built on lies. I want you to understand something, I said, my tone steady now. Your father never doubted me. Not once. His will was never changed. He never questioned my ability to manage what we built together. The man who raised you trusted me completely until the day he died. Daniel broke then, sobbing like he had as a child, his shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have known you better. You should have, I said gently, but she was very good at what she did. I turned to Mallory, who sat staring at her hands. How long have you been planning this? When did I become the enemy? You were never the enemy, she whispered. I just ran out of ways to fix what we broke. When the debt kept piling up, Mallory said quietly, when we realized we might lose everything, I started thinking about the inheritance differently. Her voice wavered, but the words came sharp. Your husband's estate is worth over $2 million, Lucinda. That money could have solved everything. That money, I said, was Robert's life's work. Money he saved so that I could live comfortably when he was gone. You don't need $2 million. Mallory shot back, the old edge creeping into her tone. You live simply. You don't travel. You don't spend. That money would just sit there while we lost our house, our car, everything we built. And there it was, the real Mallory. The woman who'd convinced herself she deserved Robert's money more than I did because she would spend it while I would preserve it. She wasn't just greedy, she had rewritten morality to make theft feel like virtue. Daniel looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Mallory, how could you think like that? How could you believe you had any right to my father's inheritance? Because she doesn't need it, Mallory shouted, her voice breaking. We do. You were too proud to ask for help. So instead of asking, I said evenly, you decided to take. The room fell silent, except for Mallory's sobbing and Daniel's unsteady breathing. Finally, he whispered, Mom, what happens now? I'd been asking myself the same thing for days. What did happen now? My daughter-in-law had nearly stolen my husband's legacy through forged documents and fabricated medical reports. My son had been manipulated into doubting me, and the lawyers meant to uphold the law had sold their honor for cash. But beneath all that corruption was the one question I couldn't ignore. Could this family still be saved? I looked at Daniel, his face hollowed by guilt, and then at Mallory, whose defiance flickered like a dying flame. That depends, I said, on what you're both willing to do to make this right. The silence in my living room stretched thin. Daniel sat with his head in his hands. Mallory stared at the floor, her tears finally gone. I waited. I wanted to see who would speak first, to see who still had truth left in them. It was Daniel who finally broke the silence. What do you want us to do, Mom? I had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about that question. Justice, revenge, forgiveness, each had clawed at my heart. I want the truth, I said. Every lie, every manipulation, every time you doubted me when you should have trusted me. Daniel lifted his head, eyes red and raw. I'll tell you everything, he whispered. But I swear, Mom, I thought I was protecting you. Mallory made me believe Dad was worried about you, that he just wanted to keep you safe. How? I asked quietly. "What exactly did she tell you?" Daniel glanced at his wife, who still wouldn't lift her eyes from the floor. "She said Dad mentioned it to her during one of his doctor visits, that he was worried about leaving you with so much responsibility." A chill ran down my spine. Mallory was with Robert at his doctor visits? Sometimes, Daniel admitted, when I couldn't get away from work. She offered to drive him, help him keep track of his medications, his appointments. I turned to Mallory. "You used my husband's illness as an opportunity to manipulate my son." Finally, she looked up at me. "Robert never said anything about being worried about you," she whispered. "But he was so weak those last months, so dependent. It made it easy to suggest that maybe he should think about what would happen to you after he was gone." "Suggest to whom?" I demanded. "To Daniel?" She nodded faintly. "I'd mentioned things when we got home from the appointments, how frail Robert was, how much he depended on you. I made it sound like he was concerned about burdening you." The betrayal cut even deeper. This woman had used my husband's final months when he was at his most vulnerable to plant seeds of doubt about me in our son's mind. "What else?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fury burning inside. Mallory dabbed at her nose with a tissue. "I started paying attention to everything you did. Every time you misplaced your keys, every time you asked someone to repeat themselves, every normal thing that happens to everyone, I'd mention it later to Daniel, make it sound concerning." And you believed her?" I asked him. "She was so subtle about it, Mom," Daniel said, eyes downcast. "She never said you were having problems directly. She just mentioned things casually, like she was worried but didn't want to make a big deal. Over time, it started to seem like there was a pattern." I thought back over the past year, her watchful eyes, the way she'd hover while I spoke. The photographs, I realized suddenly. "When did you start following me?" Mallory shifted. "About 4 months ago. The lawyers said they'd need documentation if we were going to challenge your competency." "Challenge my competency," I repeated slowly. "You were planning to have me declared mentally unfit." "No," Daniel said quickly. That's exactly what we discussed," Mallory snapped, turning to face him. "Daniel, stop pretending. We talked about a conservatorship, about making sure your mother was protected from bad financial decisions." Daniel's face went pale. "I thought we were talking about helping you manage things, not taking away your rights." "They're the same thing," Mallory said flatly. "A conservatorship would have protected her while making sure the money was used responsibly." "Responsibly?" I echoed, my voice edged with ice. "You mean paying off your debts?" "The debts were destroying us," Mallory shot back, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything? To have creditors calling you every day? To watch your home and business crumble? Do you have any idea," I said sharply, "what it's like to find out your own family has been plotting against you? To realize the people you trusted most were preparing to have you declared incompetent so they could steal what your husband built?" "We weren't going to steal anything," Daniel said weakly. "The trust would have provided for you." "Daniel," I said gently, softening only because I could see the dawning horror in his eyes. "The trust Mallory and those lawyers designed would have given me $40,000 a year while the rest of Robert's estate paid off your debts. After 5 years, there would have been nothing left." He stared at me, the color draining from his face. "Nothing?" "Nothing," I confirmed. "Your father worked for 45 years, saved every penny, built investments to ensure I'd live comfortably after he was gone. Your wife's plan would have erased it all." Mallory sprang to her feet, cheeks flushed, eyes wet. "It's easy for you to judge, Lucinda. You've never been in debt. You've never faced losing everything. You don't know what desperation feels like." "You're right," I said. "I don't know what it's like to drown in debt, but I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone I loved, and I know what it's like to realize that the woman I welcomed into my home would destroy me to save herself." "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Mallory said through tears. "I was trying to save my marriage, my family, my life. At the cost of mine," I replied quietly. The words settled like dust, heavy and inescapable. For the first time, I saw understanding flicker in her eyes, a flash of shame that came too late. Daniel walked to the window, staring out at the garden Robert and I had planted 20 years ago. "What happens now, Mom, to us?" It was the question I had dreaded. "The lawyers will face criminal charges," I said slowly. "As for us, that depends on whether there's anything left worth saving." Eddie's provided enough evidence to prove they were involved in document forgery and fraud, I said quietly. Daniel didn't turn from the window. And Mallory? I looked at my daughter-in-law, the woman who'd seemed so perfect the day Daniel brought her home. That depends on what she does next. Mallory's head lifted, her voice wary. What do you mean? Detective Chen told me that if you cooperate with the investigation, if you testify against the lawyers and help expose how this scheme worked, the district attorney may consider a plea agreement. And if I don't? Then you'll face the full consequences of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges, I said evenly. Eddie's evidence is strong enough to convict you without your help. Mallory sank back into the couch, pale and trembling. What kind of plea agreement? I don't know, I admitted. That's between you, your attorney, and the DA. But you need to understand something whatever happens. This doesn't just disappear. Her eyes met mine, wide and glassy. You tried to steal from me, I continued. You manipulated my son into doubting me. You used my husband's illness his final months to further your plan. I know, she whispered. Do you? I asked quietly. Because 5 minutes ago, you were still defending what you did. Still acting like I didn't deserve the money Robert left me. Mallory looked down, then up again, something softer, almost human, flickering in her eyes. I was wrong, she said finally. I can see that now. I let desperation turn me into someone I don't even recognize. Someone willing to destroy an innocent person to save herself. I finished for her. Yes. The word came small, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, an admission without excuses. Daniel turned from the window, his eyes red and weary. Mom, is there any way? Any chance we can fix this? That our family can survive this? I looked at him, my son, who'd once believed the best of everyone, who'd been twisted into doubting his own mother. Then at Mallory, the woman who'd orchestrated it all. I don't know, I said truthfully, but I know what has to happen first. They both waited. Mallory has to face the consequences of what she's done, I said. She needs to cooperate with the police, testify against those lawyers, and accept whatever sentence the court decides. And me? Daniel asked softly. You, I said, have to decide if you can stay married to someone who was willing to destroy your family. His face crumpled. Mom, she's my wife. I love her. I know, I said gently. But love isn't always enough. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and she shattered it. She didn't just betray me, Daniel. She betrayed you. Mallory's voice cracked. I can change. I can be better. I sighed, weary to my bones. Then you'd better start proving it. I can earn back your trust, Mallory said quietly. Can you? I asked. Because this wasn't a moment of weakness, Mallory. This was months of planning, months of lies, months of watching me go about my life while you plotted to dismantle it. This is who you chose to be. The room went silent again. Outside, children's laughter drifted from the street, ordinary life continuing, unaware that mine had been turned inside out. What do you want from us? Daniel asked finally. I want you to choose, I said. Both of you. Choose who you want to be moving forward. People who can live with the consequences of their actions, or people who keep making excuses for them. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the only one I had. I couldn't make their decisions for them. I couldn't force Daniel to leave his wife, and I couldn't make Mallory become someone she wasn't. All I could do was decide what I was willing to accept in my own life, and I was done accepting betrayal from people who claimed to love me. 6 months later, I sat in my garden on a crisp October morning, watching the leaves shift from green to amber on the magnolia tree Robert and I had planted for Daniel's 10th birthday. Time has a way of clarifying things, the way autumn clarifies what must fall away. Mallory had accepted a plea deal, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of the fees she funneled to Holloway and Pierce. The firm partners weren't as lucky. Mr. Holloway received 6 years, Mr. Pierce 4, and 2 associates received 2 years each. Eddie's testimony had sealed their fate. His meticulous notes and quiet courage ensured they faced the consequences. I'd sent him a handwritten letter afterward, the kind Robert used to write, thanking him not just for saving my inheritance, but for reminding me that integrity still exists in unexpected places. But legal justice was the easy part. Healing was harder. Daniel moved out 3 weeks after that night. He rented a modest apartment near the riverfront, somewhere he could breathe again, He told me over one of our weekly coffee meetings. I keep second-guessing everything, he confessed one morning. Every conversation, every decision. How much of it was really me and how much was her telling me what to think? It was a question I understood too well. I'd spent months doing the same sorting truth from the threads of manipulation woven into my everyday life. Now the divorce was nearly final. And as the lawyers untangled the mess, Daniel learned just how deep Mallory's deceit had run. Credit cards opened in his name, loans taken against his business, years of hidden spending. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about learning how to live without illusions. The financial situation was worse than either of us had imagined. I had offered to help with the debts, but Daniel refused. "Mom, I can't take your money to clean up the mess Mallory made," he'd said. "I need to fix this on my own this time. The right way." It was a decision I respected, even if it pained me to watch him struggle. He sold the Oldfield Park house, traded his sleek SUV for a 10-year-old Honda, and was working 16-hour days rebuilding his logistics consulting business from scratch. But there was something new about him now, a steadiness, a quiet integrity that reminded me of the boy Robert and I had raised. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't trying to prove himself to anyone. He was simply trying to live honestly. Eddie had become an unexpected constant in my life. I'd hired him as a part-time groundskeeper for the property, and he lived in the small apartment above Robert's old workshop. Watching him transform from a man sleeping in his car to someone with structure and purpose had been one of the few bright spots in this long, difficult year. "Mrs. A," he called, walking across the lawn with 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might like some company." I smiled as he set the tray down beside me on the garden table. "Thank you, Eddie. How are you feeling about today?" Today was the day Mallory's probation officer was scheduled to verify her community service hours. She'd been assigned to a local food pantry preparing meals for people facing homelessness, people like Eddie once had been. The irony was impossible to miss. "I hope she's learning something," Eddie said, staring toward the magnolia tree Robert and I had planted decades ago. "Not everyone who ends up desperate makes the choices she did." He was right. Eddie had lost everything, his job, his home, his savings, but he had never lost his moral compass. When faced with a chance to profit from someone else's pain, he'd chosen truth, even when it cost him everything. "She comes by sometimes," he added after a pause. "At the food bank. Doesn't say much, but she works hard. I think she's finally starting to understand what desperation really means." Part of me wanted Mallory to suffer to truly feel the weight of what she'd done, but a larger part of me hoped she'd change, that she'd never again mistake survival for cruelty. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Coffee later? I've got news." I showed it to Eddie. He raised an eyebrow. "Good news or bad?" "With Daniel these days," I said, smiling faintly. "It's usually both." That afternoon he arrived looking healthier than I'd seen him in months. Shoulders squared, color in his face. For the first time I sensed hope instead of guilt. "You look good," I told Daniel as we settled at the kitchen table with our coffee. "I feel good, Mom. Really good," he said, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of cleaning up someone else's disasters. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me, a photo of a modest brick storefront with Alden Logistics Consulting painted neatly on the window. "I signed the lease yesterday," he said proudly. "My own office. My own company built the right way this time." Warmth spread through me. "Your father would be proud of you, Daniel." "I hope so," he said softly. "I've been thinking about him a lot lately, about the kind of man he wanted me to be. I lost sight of that for a while. We all did," I said gently. "But we found our way back." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." I squeezed his fingers. "Always. Can you ever forgive me? Really forgive me, not just because you love me, but because you mean it?" It was a question I'd turned over in my mind for months. Could I truly forgive my son for doubting me, for becoming part of a plan that nearly destroyed my life? "Forgiveness," I said carefully, "isn't a single act. It's a decision I make every day. Some days it's easier than others." His eyes filled. "I understand." "Yes, Daniel," I continued softly. "I can forgive you. I already have. Because I know now you were manipulated too. Mallory used your love for me against both of us. That wasn't your fault." He shook his head. "It feels like it was. I should have known better. I should have trusted you more than her." "You should have," I agreed, not unkindly. "But you didn't, and we can't change that. What matters is what you do next." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "What does that look like?" "It looks like honesty," I said. "Even when it's uncomfortable. It means you come to me when things get hard instead of trying to handle them alone. It means we rebuild trust one honest conversation at a time." He smiled faintly. "And if I mess up again?" "Then we deal with it together," I said, "because you're not the same man you were 6 months ago. You've faced yourself, and that changes everything." We sat in silence for a long time, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, peace settling where pain once lived. Finally, Daniel asked, "What about Mallory? Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" I thought about that for a long moment. The question, the woman, the wound. And then I answered, "I don't know," I said finally. "What she did was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. This wasn't a single moment of desperation. She spent months planning to destroy me, and for a time, I think she even enjoyed it." Daniel said nothing, just listened. The evening light fell softly across his face, the quiet between us heavy but not unbearable. "She says she's changed," I continued. "And maybe she has. People can change, Daniel. But forgiveness isn't about whether someone has changed, it's about whether I'm willing to carry the weight of anger." He looked at me carefully. "And?" "I've decided I'm not," I said. "So yes, I've let go of the anger, but that's not the same as forgiveness, and it's certainly not the same as trust. Mallory will never be welcome in my life again, but I refuse to let her steal one more ounce of my peace." Daniel nodded slowly. "I think I understand." "Oh." As he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. The sun was setting over the marsh, painting the sky in orange and violet streaks, the kind of sunset Robert and I used to watch from our porch, his hand warm around mine as we talked about the future we were still building. "Mom," Daniel said, pulling me into an embrace. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for finding your way back," I replied softly. After he left, I walked through the house Robert and I had built together. The rooms were quiet, but no longer lonely. I had thought losing him meant facing the rest of my life alone, but these past months had taught me otherwise. I wasn't alone. There was Eddie, whose courage and loyalty had saved me from ruin, and Daniel, who was becoming the man his father always hoped he'd be. Detective Chen still called sometimes, checking in to make sure I was safe. Even the volunteers at the food pantry, where Mallory was completing her community service, had become friends after I'd started volunteering myself. My days were full again. I tutored adults at the library, helped Eddie expand the vegetable garden behind the workshop, and worked with Detective Chen's department to help other seniors recognize financial abuse before it was too late. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my story. For months, Mallory had tried to write me as a frail, confused woman, but that was never who I was. I was strong. I was capable. I had survived 42 years of marriage, raised a son, and stood against deceit. That evening, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, I watched the stars emerge over Savannah's quiet sky. For the first time in years, I felt complete peace, not because I had everything I wanted, but because I knew exactly who I was. Robert's love still lived here in the home we'd built, the son we'd raised, and the dignity I refused to lose. At 66, I wasn't ending a chapter. I was beginning the best one yet. If you've walked through betrayal, you know the kind of strength it takes to rebuild. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace over bitterness. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have forgiven them or walked away for good? And if my story reminded you of someone who's still fighting to reclaim their dignity, share it with them. We all deserve a second chance at peace, and maybe, just maybe, this story will help someone find theirs.